Welcome to Standard Theory. In the previous segment, we discussed personality types and their trends in terms of experiencing intimate identity. In this segment, we will explore the related phenomenon of the measure of true intelligence, or the intelligence quotient interval, or IQ interval. According to the standard theory of psychology, the experience of true intelligence is based on the unique interpretation of the experiences had by the individual. The experience of these unique events can be correlated to an overload process in the brain, which can be associated with either processing or lack of processing of a neurotransmitter. The understanding of the relationship between these processes of experience and interpretation of experience are considered the interpretation of true intelligence. That is, not only understanding the unique experiences that one experiences, but also being able to understand and communicate the interpretation of each of those experiences in a meaningful way. The ratio of these processes is evaluated by a measure referred to as an IQ interval. The interval is an inverse measure, as a larger IQ interval correlates to a lack of understanding or a lack of interpretation of unique experience. When using this measure, the larger the IQ interval, the larger the number of misunderstood or unsolved cycles of unique experience is perceived to be. In a very small or zero IQ interval, each unique experience is correlated to some amount of understanding as well as meaningful interpretation of each of those experiences. For this reason, the true understanding of unique and experience in an interpretable way is correlated to true intelligence. There is theoretically a way to achieve a negative IQ interval in a way that considers the outcome of unique experiences which have not expressly been experienced. That consideration gives some sort of interpretation of hypothetical experience within the range of passability of the individual. In this way, standard theory account for the result of predictable experience in a way that allows the outcome of each of those future experiences to be accounted for. This IQ interval is the measure that standard theory uses to account for true intelligence. This method can be applied to silent communication as well, with a measure of that interval existing between self-interaction and self-understanding rather than intimate identity and intimate orientation. The silent version of this interval can be referred to as a silent interval, or SI. Each of these two intervals differ from the awareness of external factors or the experience of social orientation, items, ideas or constructs, as the awareness of an item, concept or idea. This social awareness does not necessarily expressly relate to the unique interpretation of those constructs. For this reason, true intelligence is more closely related to the unique interpretation of experience rather than the exposure to information via social or shared communication. In order to measure that type of process, a measure of social IQ, social quotient or square, can be used. In social intelligence, the interval between the magnitude of a person's separation from individuality compared to the constructs that a person is able to experience within that separation gives the measure for the amount of social information that a person is aware of within a given construct. In order to standardize this process in a comparable sense, there may be a way to choose a specific level of separation per set of comparisons. For example, a social quotient in terms of a university test versus a social quotient in terms of a puzzle-solving test versus a general social quotient. These would standardize or fix the magnitude of separation of individuality or the magnitude of social identity in a way that would not rely on the individual but would rely on the subsets being tested. The amount awareness of the subsets would then be used to measure the quotient of social intelligence. Another quotient that can be explored using STEM psychology is the emotional quotient. We will take this opportunity to address the phenomenon of emotion as explained by the standard theory of psychology. In a previous segment, the dynamics of orthogonal thinking were discussed. In a constructive sense, that process is related to the indirect communication between an aversive and subversive of party. This is achieved by composing and decomposing the characteristics of communication experienced by each party. The process of emotion can be correlated to a complex composition when these parties communicate indirectly. In orthogonal thinking, the process of composition can be denoted by a plus sign. In emotional processing, the plus sign can be thought of as a complex process and becomes conditional on the perceived relationship between the aversive and subversive party. The result of that complex comparison between the aversive and subversive party is experienced as emotion. The emotions of happiness, sadness, anger, etc. are experienced as a result of that complex comparison. There is a strong correlation to the perceived capacity of the two parties to experience an equal amount of communication. Positive emotions can be equated to the experience of equatable amounts of communication. If that perceived capacity is not equivalent, then the experience of a negative emotion can be expected. These complex comparisons are the fundamental basis of the experience of human emotion. In the emotional quotient measured by STEM psychology, the quotient exists between the understanding of those experiential emotions as well as the resulting behavior from those complex processes. A smaller EQ interval would relate to an understanding of a larger range of emotion along with a lack of need for compensatory behavior in relation to each emotion. This correlates to the awareness and understanding of each of those emotions in a way that allows the compression and understanding of each without resorting to behavior to further explore the complex comparison. In a larger EQ interval, there would exist a large capacity for behavioral change related to any amount of emotion, whether the range of emotion is limited or not. The capacity for the change in behavior based on the experience of emotion would correlate to a higher EQ. When considering EQ, though, there is some room for interpretation of the functional range of the experience of emotion, as a zero EQ interval could be somewhat correlated to a lack of emotional response or lack of emotional experience. On the other end, an EQ interval that is too large could correlate to a behavioral issue or emotional disorder. For that reason, a standard operating range in a functional sense could be interpreted based on circumstance. In either sense, though, the measure of how a person responds to emotion can be accounted for based on the EQ described by the standard theory of psychology through STEM psychology. In this segment, we have discussed the silent interval, the intelligent IQ interval, the social quotient, and the emotional quotient. Please join me in the next segment where we will explore the comparable function in absolute thinking, also referred to as the science of organizations.